Hey guys, Mike here again, thanks for tuning in. So in one of my last videos, my fellow subscriber Kevin from Norway asked me if there's any chance that I can showcase or demonstrate how I achieved the sound of that particular video, which was the cover of Aerosmith's Dream On using the Legacy of Rock expansion pack for Superior Drummer. And of course, I will do because I promised him to do so. However, in this video, which is following after this little intro, I'm going to use a different song and a different SDX, but the basic idea behind this is the same. And I told Kevin already that it's not about like particular mixing move. It's more like a mindset that I used for that last video. I'm going to use for the follow-on one as well. So it's more like a approach how I think about mixing when I want to achieve that vintagey sound, even using digital samples, of course, obviously. But I hope you find this helpful. If you have any questions, as always, leave some comment below. And without further ado, let's jump into the topic. So for this example, I didn't use the recording that my subscriber asked for to explain how I did the Aerosmith. I picked another song, which is a cover of Bruce Springsteen's legendary The River, a cover I did on my channel some years ago. Because I think it has a similar vibe, was recorded in the 70s, so I thought this would be a cool example to showcase my approach here to get that vintage style. So as you see, I already prepared my session here in Reaper, routed out the channels from Superior Drummer. I'm going to talk about this in a few, and those non-orange tracks here are all the tracks from the karaoke version, from the drumless version. I have access to the multi-tracks. It doesn't sound exactly like Bruce Springsteen, of course, but that's not the point here. Created 3 buses. I'll talk about them in a few. And finally, some overall mix bus processing. But let's start with Superior Drummer. So for this song, I went for the Decades and not for the Legacy of Rock. In the end, it doesn't really matter. I went for the Ludwig kit here, Ludwig Hollywood kit, together with this amazing Slinger and Radio kit. And this is already like the first thing you want to start with. Like really, when you want to achieve some vintage sound, you should of course go for some vintage instruments. And this snare drum is already almost 100-year-old, so it will do the job for me here. Cymbal-wise, I went for the Pisces because they have a crisp, nice tone without being too harsh, so they fit in the mix really properly. So I changed nothing so far, just a little bit on the velocity curve here because I wanted to control some of the velocity settings here. But let's have a first listen. I'm gonna jump to 2 different sections first, and you know the song. I won't probably monetize my video here because it's copyright, but you get the point. So I jumped to 2 different sections. First, where the drums kick in at the river, first starting with the side stick, and then when like let's say the outro part or the final chorus starts, when Max Weinberg, the drummer of Bruce Springsteen, starts to hit the snare drum as well. So here we go.
We drive out of this valley, down where the fields were green. We'd go down to the river, and into the river we dive, oh, down.
Okay, and now jump to the second section where you hear more of the drums going on.
Like I don't remember, Mary acts like she don't care, but I remember us riding in my brother's car, a body tan, and we're down at the river.
So nothing, no processing going on whatsoever so far. I just did some rough balances. You see that the tracks from the karaoke version are slightly lower in volume because they're already processed. That's always a problem when you mix drums to an existing track, but that's another topic for another video. So let's go to Superior Drummer. The first thing you want to do, and I usually do, and what I did with the Aerosmith stuff as well, is I mean, first of all, it's a question of mindset, as I stated in the beginning. It's really kind of like, don't overthink stuff. You know, you think of how they recorded stuff back in the 60s, 70s, and even 50s. They didn't have access to all those fancy plugins, and they spent like hours and tweaking the kick drum. They were always looking at the whole song, and that's what we're gonna try to achieve here. And this is the mindset I force myself to get into, not to overthink stuff, to look at the whole song and what the song is needing and not spending too much time on just the snare drum. So the first thing, and this is unique to Superior Drummer, the first thing I'm going to do is I select all the tracks beside the stereo room microphones, the pair of overheads and the stereo room here. And we have this amazing sounding reverb chamber from the Capitol Studios the Decades SDX has been recorded in. So I go for kick, snare, top, bottom, the heads and the 3 toms I'm using for this song. And I'm gonna enable the bleed from all instruments without changing any of the settings here on the top right corner to adjust the level, because as an engineer back in the 70s, if I had recorded Bruce Springsteen, I wouldn't be able to change the hi-hat bleeding in my snare drum microphone. So I had to work with what was given from the recording. And that's usually when you record live drums, you have to struggle with. So I just want to bring myself into that mindset that recording and mixing an acoustic drum set. And let me just show you how differently this is gonna sound. So I'm gonna, just for this example, I'm going to solo just the drums, and I'm going to switch back and forth between the all bleed enabled and the default state. So you clearly hear the difference, and I'm assuming you are listening on good headphones anyway. So here we go. So maybe gonna mute the reverb here so it's getting more obvious. So now we're gonna start without the bleeding, and then I'm gonna bring it in while the drum kit is playing. The difference might be subtle, but what I clearly hear is that the whole drum set is kind of like melting together. I mean, this is obvious because now the snare drum is not coming only through the snare drum microphone, but you hear the leakage of the snare drum in the kick, in the hi-hat, in the toms, which are panned already in my DAW. So it's kind of like the whole drum set gets a little bit more width and depth and more authentic feel. That's what I'm trying to achieve here. So again, of course, you can now change the individual settings here on the top right corner to say like, okay, there's a little bit too much snare drum going in the hi-hats. And this is what I sometimes do as well, but not in cases like that. A song like that, and it's not about the river right now, a song like that is not about the drums, and that's what we want to achieve here. We want to mix a song and find an authentic feeling for that. So step 1, enabling all the bleeding from all other instruments, and don't overthink it. So let's close Superior Drummer by now, because we are almost done with Superior Drummer, the software. And the second thing, following that mindset of mixing a song, is that we now gonna address some things that are affecting the whole song. In this example, and even though the plugins are still disabled or bypassed here, I decided, and this is another thing of a mindset, decided which sound I want to achieve. And I thought, well, what about a fat, airy Neve sound back from the 70s? So I went for one plugin. I picked several plugins, but the basic sound is achieved by this plugin here, which is called the Lindell series, which is coming from Plugin Alliance. So let me just open 2 instances of them. And you see there are 2 different instances. First, this is the Lindell 80 bus. So this is kind of like, for me, acting like a summing bus here, summing plugin, which is just sitting as the first instance of my submix where every single track is running through. You see there's no big knob here. All you can do is crank the incoming signal here with the trim, and I brought down with the output level fader here by -10 as well. So what I'm going to do here is I drive some saturation coming from that plugin to affect the whole song. And this plugin here, the Lindell 80 channel, as the name suggests, is working on a channel, but we're going to talk about this in a few. So let me show you the next step. So the next plugin is the CQ from Soundtoys. This is an emulation, I think, of a famous old German Siemens AQ from, don't quote me on that, but I think it's 50s or 60s, something like that. It has a great vibe, and all I did here is added a touch of high-end shelf added a touch of 700. So usually that area where often some boxiness is occurring in that mid-range, but back in the 60s, 70s, this was a really important frequency, like really like this, either the frequencies there are boxy or they add some character, and that's what I did here, and just a touch, really a touch of low end here. The third thing here, of course, my beloved Stephen Slade tape emulation plugin, affecting the whole song again, going for the half-inch 2-track machine, going in 50 IPS, so this will really add some warmth to the overall song. And I already decided and went and committed to those plugins before I touched any EQ or compression plugin here. It's just, this is what I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to repeat myself doing about the mindset, because that's kind of like a chain old engineers have to go for anyway, because all the tracks were running through an actual tape machine. So no matter how you EQ this stuff, having this plugin already starting right from the beginning at your submix bus is going to do something to your track. So I'm going to mix into the tape situation here. And finally, just for the fun of it, because I love this plugin, is the Abbey Road vinyl plugin from Waves. This adds some noise, and if you want to, some crackle and even some clicks that's coming from old vinyl music. When you remember you have your vinyls back at home, you hear this crackle coming from your vinyl player, but the plugin here is just adding that little bit of vintage vinyl stuff. So let me bring in all those 4 plugins on the submix bus, which are affecting the whole song. And let me jump here now to the kind of like second verse, and I will bring them in one by one.
I got a job working construction for the Jonestown Company, but lately there ain't been much work on account of the economy. Now all them things that seem so important, well, they vanish right into the year. Now I just act like I...
Of course, it's adding volume, but that's not the problem here. Before you guys start to complain, I had to volume match. No, I don't have to. It's just like, it's part of the processing that during the mixing, your song gets louder. But when you listen closely without the gain staging or the gain jump here, you clearly hear how the song, the whole song gets more, let's say, an overall lift. It gets more clarity in the vocals. The low end gets tighter. So that's what I want to achieve here. And again, I didn't touch anything on the volume so far on the drums. So the second thing I did here, I've split all the tracks into 2 subgroups. First of all, the drums, then the song, which is everything but the vocals and the drums, and then the vocal bus. Reason here is that I wanted to treat the vocals differently when it comes to compression, because the song has this acoustic guitar playing and the percussion going on. So sometimes little peaks that would have affected the vocals in a way that I didn't want them to be affected, if that makes sense. So I decided to split the song and the vocals into 2 different subgroups. And for those subgroups, I just went for one single plugin, which is rather new, again from Plugin Alliance. Those guys make amazing stuff, Brainworks Plugin Alliance. This is the V76U73, it's a complicated name. Basically, this is an old German preamp compression thing going on. They combined it. Usually you get some emulations of the V76. I think Stephen Slade has one of them as well. And this U73 compressor. And all I did here is, I didn't went crazy. I played with the gain here to drive some gain into the plugin. So just like let the plugin doing its thing. And again, this plugin, all this plugin is doing beside the compression, it's like it's adds some character, some warmth, and don't overthink the plugin. If you have different plugins that do similar things, go for them. It's not about really the plugin. It's just like I wanted to have a consistent mixing approach here. So let's bring them in one by one. First on the vocals, then on the song, and then on the drums.
I got a job working construction for the Jonestown Company.
Let's do the same again when the drums are playing more heavily or more loudly, so you hear the difference when I bring them in.
But I remember us riding in my brother's car, a body tan and wet down at the reservoir. And
I want you to listen closely. What I did here, what I achieved here is like, before I brought in those 3 compressors, the vocals were kind of like popping out a little bit too much. The snare drum was a little bit over the top. But before I really dial in and go to the snare top microphone, which we usually do to tame down some of the transients, I just, again, looking from the big picture and down to the song, I still haven't touched any single EQ plugin on the drums so far, neither in Superior Drummer nor in my DAW. All I did is just the overall processing, and the song already got a huge lift. So I want you to listen to the vocals and the drums again. They're getting a little bit quieter again because the compression is working, but the overall track gets a little bit more gluier.
But I remember us riding in my brother's car, a body tan, and we're down at the reservoir. At night on the banks I'd lie awake and pull her close just to feel each breath she...
So now let's talk about the drums. And what I did here, and already anticipated this a little bit before, I used the Lindell 80 channel plugin on each and every track. So far I didn't touch anything here on the processing, which I'm going to do as a final stage if needed. So I really want to try to not almost avoid having too much processing going on to achieve that vintage sound. That was the goal of this video, right? So on every single channel you see, I use the same plugin just to get a consistent sound. What this plugin, and when I enable this, you will hear this, what this plugin is going to do, it will lift up a little bit of volume. That's the way the plugin is reacting to incoming signal. But it adds a little bit of that typical Neve sound from the 70s. It's like a little push in the low end and a little lift in the upper mids and high end. So you will clearly hear a lift in the overall sound without touching any EQ. That's again the purpose of using those plugins, kind of like processing the sounds already without processing. The best way to mix is always to use no plugin at all at the end to get the most organic sound, right? But if you can achieve that with saturation and vintage emulations, here you go. And as a second instance, on every single track, I use the tape machine from Stephen Slade again, this time on the 2" 60 track machine and 30 IPS, which doesn't push too much low end into the tracks, but I wanted to emulate the vintage and old recording style. The drums going into a Neve board with a preamp, some EQ compression if needed, and then printing onto tape and then mix them from here. So that's kind of like the way I approach this here. I didn't change anything on the setting. I just throw the plugin on each and every track to get a starting point here. So that's what I'm going to do, and I will bring in everything at once when the drums are playing.
But I remember us riding in my brother's car, a body tan, and we're down at the reservoir. At night on the banks I'd lie awake and pull her close just to feel each breath she take. Now those memories come back to haunt me.
And finally, to have a consistent sound, even though those drumless tracks I used here for this recording are already kind of like processed, or they are processed, and even worse, they are in MP3, so already compressed. However, I wanted to bring them closer to the drums and to the sound of the drums, and that's the reason I used the Lindell 80 channel plugin from Plugin Alliance on those tracks as well. And here I did already some processing, minor EQ settings, some compression if needed, because I think the drumless tracks weren't mixed that well, to be honest. So I did just some slight things, lift a little bit the whole track, and now let's bring them in all at once, so you get an idea how we're gonna end up in the overall sound.
But I remember us riding in my brother's car, a body tan, and we're down at the reservoir. At night on the banks I'd lie awake and pull her close just to feel each breath she take. Now those memories come back to haunt me. They haunt me like a ghost. Is a dream alive? It don't come true.
So you see, and I'm gonna switch back with all processing so far. So maybe the volume, the audio will jump a little bit of cracks here because my computer cannot do the processing all at once with the screen recording here. So bear with me, but you will clearly hear the difference. And again, I did nothing so far on the drums, EQ and compression wise. It's just like what we did is enable the bleeding in Superior Drummer and use some vintage processing starting from the submix group, then onto the drum bus and done in every single track. Of course, I'm going to process some of the drums if needed, but now I have the feeling I don't need to do that much because the overall processing that I did here with those vintage emulations or emulations of vintage analog gear already brought me a long way to the final result, especially for a song like that, where the drums are not probably the most important part. They are just part of the whole song to accompany and to serve the song, but not kind of like the modern polished drum sound that we are used to. So a final A and B between all processing, bypassed and enabled.
I got a job working construction for the Jonestown Company, but lately there ain't been much work on account of the economy. Now all them things that seem so important, well, mister, they vanish right into the air. Now I just act like I don't remember. Mary acts like she don't care, but I remember us riding in my brother's car, a body tan and wet.
So that was it. I hope you've learned something from this video. Finally now, in the end, I'm gonna play you just like 30-40 seconds of my old cover with the remixed version that I just showed you. Of course, now I played everything and some small adjustments on the drums, but nothing really crazy. So just to get an idea how I saw this song and I was hearing that song when using those plugins I just showed you in that video. Again, thanks ever so much for watching, guys. Leave a comment below and see you next time, and have a great time making music. I'm out. Bye.
Now all them things that seem so important, well, mister, they vanish right